Hey, praise the Lord, guys. I'm Shaw Greenhorn. Now, at that feast, the governor released unto them one prisoner whomsoever they would. Now, there was a certain prisoner there named Barabbas, who lay bound with them that had made insurrection, committing murder in the insurrection. The multitude cried unto Pilate that they should release unto him whomsoever they desired, as he was his custom. But Pilate answered and said, Would ye that I release unto you the king of the Jews? For he knew that for envy the chief priest had delivered him. All right, so here we have, Jesus's, final moments before his fate is ultimately sealed. So far we've just had accusations. We've just had him standing before the council. We've just had the liars, them really smite him with the palms and spitting in his face. But nothing has been done or pronounced against him yet. We know that he is here because they want to put him to death by crucifixion, and it's not in their law to put anyone to death by crucifixion. They are allowed to stone. Like I said last time, the woman taken in adultery, they set her before him, saying, the law of Moses bade us stone her, for she was taken in adultery. But what sayest thou? That they might have reason to accuse him of being cruel, or even worse, of saying no and then breaking the law of Moses. So it was in their power to put people to death by stoning. But, it was written that he should be crucified, because he became, that curse for us, that we might be, take the blessing that he is. It was actually a swapping of the places. In this moment, we really see, the wisdom of, the understanding, the ability to see through the smoke, of Pontius Pilate. Because he listened to all the witnesses argue, and they all came forth, and they said what they had to say. Now, just like it was in the palace of the high priest, where they just came from, where even the high priest knew that their testimonies did not agree with each other, and it was like a fishing expedition, as they were called in a court of law, when they're reaching for straws, really having nothing really solid to commit him onto. So now here we pick up in front of Pontius Pilate, the governor. Now, like I said, them being the high priest, the chief priests, elders, and scribes, they had the religious rule, things of faith and of the synagogue and teachings and stuff like that. So they bring him, onto Pontius Pilate for many reasons. They wanted to crucify him. Also, they wanted to keep their hands clean. It was in their heart to deliver him with such a great accusation, something that, it stuck, so heavily. And by the time they delivered him, over onto the governor, he would be so disgusted that he would just pronounce the sentence and be done with it. But we see the governor here, using, discretion, using wisdom, observing really. He doesn't have a reason against Jesus as they do. Jesus, he was still in the spotlight, with the things that he taught, which contradicted a lot of the things that they taught. And it showed how they were in the wrong. The wrong things that they were doing, walking around pretending that they were perfect. So he's, stepping in their Kool-Aid, as the Americans like to say. The things that he's doing is leaving them looking like fools, really. Because if the people were to gravitate to his doctrine, they would see the difference in their walk. They would see how their minds would change. The things that they focus on would change. The inner man would change. They wouldn't focus on the same things. They wouldn't desire the same things. They wouldn't desire to be in the spotlight. They wouldn't desire, just riches blindly. To have wealth is good, but there would be substance also with that wealth, and not just, raw, greed and gluttony and just lusting. Paul said, we have not because we ask not, and we receive not because we ask amiss, that we may consume it upon our lusts. And they were guilty of this, the entire way. So we see Pontius Pilate being able to see through their charade, masquerading, and to see and understand that it's because of envy. And how was he just standing there, able to deduce, this? All these things, they came from non-verbal cues. He saw how they would furrow their eyebrow at him, how they would squint the eye, the kind of faces they would make at him, the way that they would speak. Being able to identify that these, men of the faith, are they not supposed to be peaceful men? Men of honor and renown and dignity, nobility, men of holiness and righteousness. Why are they behaving like this? And the more he observes, he sees the accusations that they're making onto him, and he's able to read between the lines. I imagine him being governor, that many cases stood before him, and over time he notices patterns. He's able to categorize people's reactions and give you a good guess of what they mean. He's seen the stern, cold-hearted, I don't care about anything, not even my own self. He's seen those people that are ultra intuitive and like to take advantage of others, and they're just out for themselves, and they have the most selfish, ambition, caring for no one, not even if they destroy others. He's seen the innocent that's been wrongly accused, have something heavy brought upon them to satisfy somebody else's desire. Usually them taking the scapegoat position. He's seen that. He's seen the innocent that, turn on their face. the shakiness in their voice. He's seen the guilty but regretful that, yeah, they did wrong. But these people, they have some substance within them. They have some character. They have morals. There's a person living inside, even though they did wrong, and they're able to feel the wrong that they did and have regret as much as they are guilty. He's able to see bringing people before him for the wrong reason. Just, like I said, their own selfish gain. Whatever they're trying to accomplish, usually it might require a scapegoat where another person takes the fall, but then, the thing that it was supposed to generate is now left unoccupied. And, by some stroke of luck, speaking sarcastically here, by some stroke of luck, they're right there, able to just pick it up. Look at this huge blessing that just, fell into their hands, at the cost of the life, possibly, or at least freedom of this innocent person. So this governor, he's able, to read certain cues, being the leader that he is, often giving speeches, governing the governing the land, writing laws to benefit people. It's his duty to protect the innocent and to punish the guilty, as the Bible would say. It's his, duty to live, honorably. No doubt he's gonna have a quest for money at some point. But I give, hands off to him for being able to separate foolishness from reality. Because the high priest, he just did not. This high priest, well, I mean, I guess one could argue that it was the high priest, the chief priests, elders and scribes, their position was in jeopardy, not the governor as we see here. If Jesus was to continue, it would be them people would fall away from. I keep saying, imagine coming onto the temple to receive healing. You hear this of these miracles being performed by Jesus, and you come on a day when he's not there. And lo, one of these, chief priests or even elders or scribes are in there teaching, and you're looking to be healed, and they're unable to do anything about it. Jesus, he's really, changing everything as we know it. Wow. It was their position that was at, risk. Pretty sure if, somebody was to threaten, the governor's position, he would have something to say. Would he, resort to these deceptive, manipulative, dishonest, just, hooligan, being crafty? Would he resort onto these kind of things? If you look at Barabbas, what did it say about him? He made insurrection. What is that? When you try to overthrow the government. Who's the government? It's the governor and everybody else that's, sitting in this judicial, system. In this case, the religious leaders, they would be safe. The chief priests, elders, and scribes, they would be safe. So when he's about to release Barabbas, know that the risk is to him. Because it was said that what? All the men with him that, did the uprising, they were all bound together. Barabbas being the leader, the alpha, the one that, puts pen to paper. If, he is released, could he not go and get a whole new band of men? He could. This time, having failed once, now he knows the system a little better. He knows where to attack. He knows where to concentrate his, effort and forces. He knows who to take out, first. Strike early, strike quick. Remove as much as the hires that you can. And then you just battle the rest afterwards. His seat was in jeopardy, releasing Barabbas. So if you look at it, we have two prisoners in jail. Each prisoner being a threat to one of these, systems. Jesus being a threat to the religious leaders, the chief priests, elders, and scribes, and the high priests, Sadducees, Pharisees. Barabbas being a threat to the government itself, which is this governor, Pontius Pilate. So we also see the crowd here, being pushed to ask for a certain, preference. This is in Mark. When I covered this, topic in Matthew a couple months ago, it was shown how these chief priests and elders and the scribes, how they themselves walk among the crowd, telling the people to ask for Barabbas. People, they didn't just go and ask for Barabbas if we're keeping with the truth of the entire gospel. Like I said, and I always will say, each gospel, it covers a certain, aspect. All the things, they are not perfectly repeated in each gospel. But if you wherever more detail is given in a certain gospel, it's safe to go with that one as the final, picture for that event. And in Matthew, it was said how they walked among the crowd and told, I think it even said they paid. They began to give bribes, to ask for Barabbas, if I'm not mistaken. They might have, they might not have. I'm drawing that they did give bribes. But if not, they certainly did go and persuade the people to ask for Barabbas. So we see, them taking, really going all the way out there, coming into their plan. These people, were they not those that came unto Jesus to receive healing? I mean, it's one thing to hear doctrine, because it's not like they can be grateful for the truth that he's preaching unto them, for the truth that he's teaching. You can only be grateful for that when you stand in the judgment. Because remember, we walk by faith and not by sight. And all these things they're just speculation to us. But not to Jesus, who was there since the beginning. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We walk by faith. Jesus, he does not walk by faith. He's seen all, he created all. So you can only be grateful for the doctrine, I believe, in the judgment. When you see that, whoa. Not only was, he telling me the truth, but look at the weight that would have been on me if I didn't listen, if I didn't take heed. Look at how serious this atmosphere is. Look at this devil. Look at him chomping at the bits. You think it would have been a nice time if I was delivered into his custody, being counted an offender? Offender. Look at all these angels. Look at how serious this court is. Nobody's laughing. But did they not receive their healing? Did they not, the blind, get healed, the deaf, the dumb, leprosy? How many of these people were there among this crowd? I guarantee you. How many of them ate from the fishes and the loaves? How many of them heard his doctrine and saw, the light inside him that was not inside these religious leaders? So they stood all here, in agreement, and nobody had anything good to say. Well, it doesn't record that anyone had any good to say. I'm hoping, and I really do hope, that there was at least one there that would speak up on his behalf, even if he was a minority and would have been left out. But we know that it has said that, they were afraid to confess on Jesus, to believe on him, because, people were being put out of the synagogue, literally being put out for believing on Jesus. And if they're about to kill him, then why get myself in trouble unnecessarily if he's gonna die anyways? I wonder how many people were thinking like this. Alright, so let's get into the scriptures. It starts out, saying, and at this feast, the governor released one prisoner unto them, whosoever they would. So how did we end up here? We just had the Last Supper, where he, told them, one of you shall betray me. Is he that dipping his hand with me in the dish? Then he had the communion. This is my body, which is broken for you. He broke the bread. Then gave them the wine. This is the blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many. They sung a hymn and went up to the Mount of Olives. He told them, all you shall be offended this night because of me, because it is written, I will smite the shepherd and the sheep shall be scattered. Simon Peter said, though all men should forsake thee, yet will I not. Jesus said, before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. But they all, said that we would never, even unto death, we would never leave you. So then he took, them to the Garden of Gethsemane. He left the 8 on the outskirts because Judas, he was going to betray him to the high priests and chief priests and elders. He began to pray, Lord, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Came back, found them sleeping. Simon Peter, couldst thou not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you enter not into temptation. Then, we saw Judas come and kiss him, gave them the sign, whomsoever I shall kiss, the same is he. They took him away. Peter drew his sword, cut off the servant of the high priest's ear. They brought him to the palace of the high priest. Then they assembled, a whole council together, the high priest, chief priests, elders, and scribes, accusing him of many things, but their witnesses did not agree together. Accusing him that we heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and in 3 days raise up another temple made without hands. The high priest taking control of the whole situation, asking him, answerest thou nothing? Here is not what they, witness against thee. Tell us plainly, art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Jesus said, I am. Hereafter shall you see the Son of Man sitting in the clouds, sitting at the right hand of power, coming in the clouds of heaven. Then he rent his clothes. Asked them, what think ye? They said, he is guilty of death. Then they began to spit on him, cover his eyes, buffet him, and smite him with the palm of their hands, saying, prophesy unto us. So then we cut to where Peter, he was outside. The maid came unto him. Surely thou was with Jesus of Nazareth. He denied. Went out to the porch, the cock crew. Another maid came unto him, said unto those that stood by, this time, surely this one was also one of them. He denied again. So then after walking around for some time, all the people came unto him as a whole, saying, surely thou art one of them. Thou art Galilean, and thy speech agreeth thereto. And he began to curse and to swear, I know not the man. Cock crew. Then he remembered the words of Jesus. Before the cock crowed twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. And he thought thereon and wept bitterly. So then in the morning, after all this, they gathered a consultation, the chief priests, elders, and scribes, and they bound him and carried him to Pilate. So then when they set him before Pilate, now Pilate is asking him, art thou the king of the Jews? That was his accusation, that he's saying that he's the Son of God, being the king of the Jews. Jesus said, thou hast said. And, the chief priests, they witnessed many things against him, but he answered nothing. Pilate said, answerest thou nothing? The same thing as the high priest said. Pilate said, answerest thou nothing? Behold, what all these things they do testify against thee. when he held his peace, the pilot, he wondered, he marveled. So then we pick up here. Know what the feast the governor was, want to release unto them one prisoner whomsoever they would. So this is a tradition. At some point, this became a thing. That the governor, he's able to pardon people on death row. We know that the president, he's able to pardon, people. I'm not aware of anybody else. There might be others in positions that are also able to pardon. And if not them, surely they can get a word to either the governor or the president, if they are that important. So at some point, they began this tradition. And that's what it really is that I release, onto you. So at first, it maybe didn't used to happen because remember when, these feasts were given, they were traveling through the wilderness, coming from, the land of Egypt onto the promised land. There were no governors, there were no prisoners or anything like that. These things were established, way later, with the kings and the rulers, the judges. So then at some point, I imagine that it was like maybe a Cinderella story. Now, these kind of stories, you see them on TV all the time where we'll have somebody that, either they came from such a misfortune, background, a situation, family circumstances, poverty, oppression, they have all these things, against them, and they're viewed in such a favorable light as such a, a humble and meek, lovable person. It's like, how could this person end up in all this trouble? And the people that are, around, they testify to these things, and the people they got together. I imagine I'm just giving my, example as to how something like this could come to be. So then they all, petitioned the governor, and then, on this feast day, he stood up to speak, and he said, why not? Because I'm thinking, what other reason could there be for him to start, pardoning people? Maybe it was a family member that was in trouble that he pardoned. Even though I think that that would be less likely, but possible. I mean, I'm thinking of, the reasons why. Why would I be pardoning somebody from prison? And, when he does this, then he gets such a cheer from the crowd. And, as human beings, we love praise, right? We love being, viewed in a positive light. So when he saw this praise and this thanksgiving and the news that spread around, hey, why not? Come around next feast day. Maybe he suggested, maybe he suggested it himself or the people did, and it just became a thing. So now it's a tradition now that on this feast day we are still in Passover and the feast of unleavened bread. Like I said, he just ate the Passover with the disciples where he said, "One of you shall betray me." Did the communion, the bread and the wine. So whomsoever they would, which makes me speculate that whosoever this Cinderella story was, it was the people that brought it to his attention because the kid the now this governor, he's living like a king. I want to call him king, right? He's living like a king. That's what I'm seeing with this guy. So he sits in his palace. He has the best food, the best maids, servants, and he rules the land. He has everything he wants and needs. So it's not like his ears is gonna be. I mean, he has messengers. He has people that keep their ears to the ground to keep him enlightened about what's going on among the people. So I'm seeing that maybe at one point somebody came to him with this news and it became a story, something to look into. Now the next one says, now there was a prisoner there called Barabbas, who lay bound, with them that had committed insurrection and had committed murder in the insurrection. So now here we have Barabbas being introduced. Like I said, Barabbas, this guy, he's a notable criminal, like one of those super high ultra criminals. I see him being a man of force, one that uses violence to get the things that he needs, communicate what he needs and wants. So insurrection, that's when they seek to overthrow the government. So imagine in this insurrection, they're going to be looking to take out the leaders, which is the governor being one of the highest ones, quite possibly the king, any constituent offices. At some point, they will go to the tax collectors and redirect the money to them. Yeah, they would still be collecting taxes, but now it goes to Barabbas, right? Most importantly, they would need to take out the soldiers. Because, they are like, there's no police in those days. It was just the soldiers that fought for the king, usually. And the king's, strength was in his soldiers that would fight war for him. There's a parable given, in the Bible. What king does not sit down and count the cost if he is able to, with his 10,000 soldiers, come against another king which come out with 20,000 soldiers, whether he be able to overtake him. So at some point, they would have to take out the soldiers, or at least enough of them. Enough of them for them to understand that, hey, we're in control now. You guys can continue to die, or you can serve me. So Barabbas, who lay with them bound, that had committed insurrection, even committed murder in the insurrection. So they're all bound together. Imagine it's him and his highest, lieutenants and generals, plan failed, plan thwarted. So, like I said, if we release this guy, what are we looking for? Is he not gonna go and get another army? And now, he knows all the secrets. He knows where to attack. He knows the weak points. While he's in that jail, I guarantee you he's reviewing what happened. Figuring out the odds. I shouldn't have started out, in that location. I should have went to this other one. He's revising, how to make this thing more effective. In one of my videos, I said, be careful when, certain people have asked a question against you to their own brain, because it will search for answers. It finds it. I wanna, imagine a friend that's making, a lot of money. Now he has, a lot of friends around him, but he's gonna have different tendencies and possibilities, right? But then there's one that's watching him, and this one he's able to take it all the way there, and he'll just watch his friend and seek for the most opportune time to get rid of him, to take him out. Because Barabbas, he asked this question: how do I take over this land? And I guarantee you, he's not gonna stop until he gets the answer and gets what he's looking for, or he gets taken out himself. He gets killed. So the next one says, "But the crowd cried unto Pilate, beginning to desire him to do unto them as he had often done before." So now, they're crying to release a prisoner. We haven't seen them, for a name yet. Right now, they're just executing the custom. They're exercising the custom itself. It's time for you to release unto us who you always will. And I asked this question: we're releasing these prisoners, right? I mean, are you concerned about your own welfare? I mean, these guys, they're prisoners, they're criminals. They're criminals, right? Surely you wouldn't release the criminal that's burglarizing people's homes. You would not release him, right? You wouldn't release the criminal that's killing people, right? You wouldn't release the criminal that's kidnapping little kids, right? I imagine, or it's a hope. I certainly do hope that these people, they're asking for the right criminals. Barabbas, he committed murder and insurrection. I would want to say that that's not against the people. He just wants to take control of the land. He's not looking physically to hurt any of them. Now, when he gets control now, he's gonna obviously, put into place, some ridiculous things that's gonna oppress the people so much, especially for riches and land. He's gonna want so much from them. He's gonna take over their lands and their vineyards, their flocks and stuff like that. But that's like such a higher order thing that's way down the line that they don't see that immediately. So my question is that, are they wise in which prisoners they're asking for? You don't want the child molester. You don't want the murderer. You don't want the home, burglarizer. You don't want the man that's robbing people as they pass by a certain area. There's certain things that you don't ask for. You don't, because that's against you. We went through all this trouble to catch him, and now first thing we're gonna do is release him. It's you guys that are gonna come back crying. So the people, the multitude, they began to cry unto the governor that he, give unto them, what he was used to giving. So time to release this prisoner. So, I want to say this, if the governor, if he was to decide that this was somehow not a favorable thing for him to do anymore, I mean, would he not stand to lose popularity with the people? But, I'll ask the question, how did he become governor? Was he appointed by the king? Was there voting in those days? I doubt there was, right? Being appointed by the king, what would they have to do to get him removed? How much of a jeopardy would his position be in? All right, so the next one says, but the governor, he instead asked, will ye that I deliver unto you the king of the Jews? So, he's trying to fix a great mistake that's about to be made. Like I said, he's had time to see the interaction between them and him, to see just how they're behaving and the lies that they're telling that's not adding up. No doubt he's heard of Jesus of Nazareth before, of all the wonderful things that he did. And like I said, his position is not at risk. It's the chief priests, elders, and scribes. Their position is at risk. If we release Barabbas, my position, being the governor, that's when my position becomes at risk. Because he's gonna try and do the same thing to overthrow me. He makes a suggestion unto the people: will ye that I release unto you the king of the Jews? So now here we're not just at the high priest palace where it was only the chief priests, elders, scribes, and the council. It was late at night. I believe everybody was in their bed. These men, they were summoned to this council. I don't imagine any regular folks were around, but now here we have the multitude, people being around. These people, no doubt, haven't been helped by Jesus at some point. Whether it be them directly or a child, a spouse, another family member, whether it be a mother, a father, a brother, a sister. So now, we see, the governor here trying to play on his popularity, trying to play on the goodness that he has done, presenting Jesus before them. Like he's trying to speak on Jesus' behalf. The king of the Jews, do you not remember the things that he has done for you? At what point did we get, to this? At what point did we start seeking his life? Are you guys gonna play along with this, charade that's going on? Are you gonna play along with what these, dishonorable men that are supposed to be setting the example? Are you guys gonna play along? Or are you guys gonna shut it down? Are you guys gonna shut it down and put them in their place? Let Jesus go. Because like I said, I keep saying, if you kill Jesus, right? When your child falls sick to the point of death, are you gonna go to these chief priests? Are they gonna help you? There's so many things that he's communicating to them in this moment. And he's hoping that common sense will take over. We know that these guys, they're all plotting. But they can only plot inside their little palace. They can't come outside the palace and plot without you guys agreeing to what they're doing. Yeah, they have all power inside that palace. But now, this is in the open, where people have common sense, they have eyes, they have memory, they have understanding, they have ears. They heard all the great things he did. Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? Did you guys not just bring him through on the donkey? The King of the Jews saying, Hosanna, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Hosanna to the Son of David. Hosanna in the highest. Did you guys not acknowledge him as your king, by the wonderful works that he has done and he still continues to do? Where's all that celebration? Where's all that, acceptance and that love that he, received? I'm trying to jog you guys' memory here. We know that it's the religious leaders, the chief priests, elders, and scribes. They're the one with the problem, and it's all them. But you know how a crowd can get sometimes. In psychology in college, we were taught that when a group of people get together like this, crowd, it takes on a mind and identity of its own. Knowing all the great things that he did and what he stood for. All we needed was enough people saying, one thing against him. And then as these leaders were walking around suggesting to the people that, it soon just became unanimous and they all started saying the same thing. So the last one says, for he knew that for envy, the chief priest had delivered him. So, like I said, how did he know? He's been in his custody for a little while. They're presenting their case because, they want to keep their hands clean. They want their dirty work done and they want to keep their hands clean. But, it doesn't work out because we're going to see where he says, know that I have the power to crucify you or to release you. Jesus said no power could be given unto you. You could have no power unless it were given unto you from heaven. Therefore, he that delivered me unto you had the greater sin. Jesus is acknowledging that these men that are delivering me unto you, they have the greater sin. So them trying to keep their hands clean is not going to stand up on that great day. He already gave the answer. But that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to keep their hands clean and deliver him unto the governor with enough scorn, with enough, distaste, with enough, repulsiveness that when he looks at him, he's just gonna just make up his face just as they are making that face at him. It's like, no, just get this guy out of here. They're trying to, pass on their disgust onto the governor. They're trying to take the disgust that they have and pass it on to the governor and say, here, run with this. And he's not buying it. So like I said, he knew that for, envy. This was deduced over this whole time that he's been there. Observing him, his body language, his reactions, observing them, their body language, their reactions, their words, because Jesus, he's not saying anything. Reading between the lines. They say if you listen to people, they'll tell you who they are. This governor, he has nothing to lose if Jesus was to continue his mission. But we do have a lot to lose if Barabbas gets successful in what he wants to do. So envy that they can't say the words that he does. Where does he get this doctrine from? They even asked him when he was in his hometown in the temple teaching on the Sabbath, from whence had this man, this wisdom and these mighty works that are done by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon, and his sisters? Are they not all here with us? Envy of his words. He was there from the beginning. He is the Son of God. He is the one that you're waiting on. Envy, of his miracles. Like I said, imagine how embarrassing it would be for them to be in that temple teaching and somebody come from afar. Just like how the Queen of Sheba came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. Somebody came from afar to receive some healing because they hear that there's a prophet over here in Jerusalem. And they come on a day when he decided to go across the waters. He like traveling by ship. And them coming, wanting to be healed. And they're met with just these chief priests, elders, and scribes that are just, reciting the law of Moses and really playing, politics and the red carpet. There to receive praise from men. How does that look? So he knew that for envy and jealousy, they delivered, Jesus. I am Straw Greenhorn.